So it's a rainy, nasty day out here today, so I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about how to build a turtle dog stand and show you how I built mine and what kind of equipment I used and how to set it up. So I tried to look up a little bit about the history of the turtle dog stand, how it was named that, and I couldn't find it, but from what I remember, it was a combination of somebody whose trail name was Turtle Lady, and if I'm right about that name, and she was devising the stand for her hammock, and somebody else had some input in it. Red Dog, Old Dog, something was the trail name of that person. I can't remember. And so the combination of those two, they came up with the name Turtle Dog, and so that's why it's called that. But it's a stand for hammocks to be used, if you're not familiar with it, to be used in a place like at our house, for example. Before we put poles out there weren't any trees close enough to set it up. Or you go into a state park and maybe there's no trees in the specific campground you're at, or maybe the state park does not allow hammocks. Any of them types of things is a perfect, the turtle dog stand is a perfect use for that. Any place there's no trees for whatever reason. So I'm gonna lay out the material here and kind of go over what I got. So a turtle dog stand consists of two separate stands that form like a tripod, and two metal poles that join together, and two metal S-hooks. These wooden stands are these are 7 foot long and have when you make the actual measurement, they're about 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches, and 7 foot long. And I'll show you what we did here to get them to all hinge together. So I'm going to lift this pole up. So this hinge here is a like a barn door hinge, and I'll bring it a little closer so you can get a better view of it. So this hinge is 3.5 inches long, and this part of the hinge is about 4.5 inches long. So pretty simple. Find some bolts long enough. These are actually a little bit longer. I have been meaning to cut them off, but I haven't done it yet. But anyway, you got 3 holes in this part of the hinge. And so just drill the holes through the outside boards and put the bolts and nuts through there, and then lay this part of the hinge on top of this board to mark where you put your 2 holes to there, and then that allows it to hinge. And these bolts here are not really tightened down because you'll need to swing this pole out to the side and this pole out to the side. So these are a little bit loose so these boards can move in and out. And while I'm down here, these S-hooks I used are roughly 2.5 inches long, and they are about 1/4 inch thick. So they're pretty sturdy. They hold a lot of weight. And then I'll show you. So these steel poles, they have, sorry about that, these steel poles have some eye bolts in them on each end. And this eye bolt that I used is 5 inches long, and across the opening up here is about 1.75 inches across the eye part of the eye bolt. And these metal poles that are used are from a chain link fence, the top bar that goes across, and they're tapered on one end so one pole can slide inside the other. And these are cut so that when they're one slid into the other, the length when they're put together is 12 foot long. That's what I used for the metal poles. So when I was talking about the outside poles needing to slide in and out, this is what I was talking about. And you have a cord tied to all three poles to keep them, once you get it set out, so they don't fall out. You know, somebody bumps it or whatever and one leg kicks out and it falls down or whatever. The rope between the three legs is tied to keep that from happening. And what I did originally is, like a lot of people do, I measured up 18 inches and drilled a hole through each of the three legs. The 18 inches, that is not really important, that's just what I went with, so they'd all be the same height. So I ran a cord through all three legs with the thinking that whenever I collapsed it, I could just pull the cord tight and wrap it around the legs. Well, it ended up being like 192 wraps, you know, I'm exaggerating, but it was a lot. And then it always got tangled up. It was always just a pain in the butt. And then the weight with the cord running through all three of them, you could have it set up where, like right now, the cord might be really tight, but then you could swing this leg way out far and the cord's still tight. And then next time you set it up, you could have that leg out off to the side and it's still tight and everything looks right, but you're getting a different setup every time. And depending on how close you have the legs and how far you have the legs, it's going to raise and lower the height of your hammock, which will affect how high it is off the ground or low it is to the ground. So I wanted something more standard, and I was talking to somebody about it and we got an idea. So what I did is I took these little bitty eye bolts. They're just a little bit bigger than these carabiners here. And I just bought some cheap carabiners. I put a eye bolt on each leg about 18 inches. And then I measured these ropes from the outside edge of the carabiner across the string to the outside edge of the other carabiner. And now each leg has two eye bolts. Like this one's empty when it's put away. And I got another eye bolt up here. I can unclip from this eye bolt and clip to this eye bolt, and then now when I pull it apart, it's the same length, and that length is 4 feet. So I did that on all of these. So now I just unclip them, clip it to the next leg, do the same thing on all three of them. So now when I pull it apart, it's always the same every time. You know, if I have one leg off, it's going to be loose. No matter which way I move it, it's going to be loose. So if all three of these cords are tight, then I know I have all three poles the same distance. It's the same way every time. I don't have to mess with that tangled up cord and all that kind of stuff. And when I go to put it away, all I got to do is bring the legs in a little bit so it loosens that slack. Take this, clip it to the eye bolt up there, and now it's nice and neat, ready to put away. And I can just fold the stand in and put it away, and there's not all that extra cord getting tangled up and having to mess with. It's a lot simpler system, it's a lot cleaner system, and it's you know it's the same way every time. So it's something that I really like. I'm glad I did it, and it works out a lot better than running that cord through all three legs and having to deal with that tangled mess. So now when I get to where I'm going to set up camp, I just kind of spread these apart, go along, clip the three lines in, get it all spread apart so all three lines are tight, and then I'm ready to go into the next step. Okay, so the next thing is I take this S hook, and on this part of the hinge there's 3 holes in it. You got these 2 bolts that go into the 2 outer holes, and this S hook goes into the middle hole. And that's another thing you got to make sure when you're buying your S hook that it's going to fit through the hole. I think I had to drill this hole out a little bit, if I remember, to get that hole in there. Stop. And then these are little eye bolts that I clip the strings to when they're in storage. And I'll those eye bolts there, what I did is where I have them hitched to the bottom, I just where they're hitched at down there on the bottom, I just had it clipped into that bottom one and then brought it up and then marked where I needed to put my eye bolts up top. Okay, so for the next step, one of these poles, this one here, is tapered to fit inside the other pole. And like I said, my 12-foot measurement is with this already inside of the pole and everything. With them put together, it comes out to 12 foot. And so my next step will be to put the 2 poles together. And then I will take the eye of this eye bolt. And I've only got 1 pole right now, but just to show you, all it does is hang on that S hook right there. That's all you got to do to it. Once the poles are together, both stands are up, you just stick the eye bolts in there, and I'll show you how that looks. One thing to point out when you're putting S hooks in, you want this part of the hook facing towards the center of the stand, where your hammock will be hanging, so that when you take the eye of the eye bolt, you can just clip it right on there. Okay, so I've got the 2 poles put together. And what I do is I just take the eye bolt, clip it on there, on that S ring, and then do the same thing on this end. Now a lot of times, just like now, I've had to bring in the stand because you can't guess it perfectly. So I've had to bring in this stand a little bit. So now I'm going to kind of tighten it back up, and you want to make sure that your S beaners, your S clips are not in a real bind and everything. So you get it all set up so that it's all hanging right, and all the strings are right, so they're right, the right tension. Your poles are all the same distance apart and tight. You've got this put together all the way. It's not halfway hanging out of there. So just double check everything and make sure it looks right. And these stands, they're a little bit wobbly. They wobble a little bit from side to side. I could have tightened the bolts on there a little bit more, but I just never did. It worked for me. And one thing I want to put, just to cover myself, I'm not sitting here saying that this stand is going to hold up to whatever you do and it's going to be perfectly safe and nothing ever is going to go wrong, because I didn't design this. I'm just showing a design that I copied, and to make my own stand and my little changes I made to it. So definitely, just a legal thing here, use this at your own risk. I've used it I've used it off and on for a couple years now and haven't had any issues, but that doesn't mean that you won't. So this is a suggestion, something that I do when I use it. This is a stake. It's got the little twist so you can sit there and twist it into the ground. You can use any kind of stake or anything you want. But if you set this up like this and you have your hammock here, and a breeze picks up, if you're not laying in a hammock, it's just sitting there, and a breeze picks up, it's going to turn your hammock into a sail. And right now there's nothing to keep this whole thing from blowing over and possibly hitting something or tearing something up or whatever. So one piece of advice is, if you tie a string up here to the eye bolt or around this pole or wherever you want to do, what I suggest because I try to make sure everything's centered and all that stuff. Just kind of a perfectionist in me. But I hang the string straight down, just let it hang down so I know where the middle's at. And then I stake this, I put this stake in the ground, crank it way down in there, and then I tie that string to this loop and pull it tight. So now that this stand is anchored to the ground, and I do the same thing to both stands. So now if I'm out of the hammock and the wind catches the hammock, then it's going to hold it there, you know, a whole lot less chance of it flipping over. And another thing on the measurements of this pole, this metal pole here, I accidentally said tarp instead of hammock, so while I'm thinking of tarp, let me show you. So speaking of tarps, the length of the ridgeline of your tarp, like I said, these poles are 12 foot long, but some of that's on the outside of that eye bolt and some of it's inside this tripod here. So if you measure from outside of this tripod to the outside of that tripod, on this particular thing, the way I've got it set up, it's 11 foot. So that means if you have a tarp with a 12-foot ridge line, it's not going to fit. Your tarp, by the time you get it tight, you're going to be inside these poles here and it's not going to fit right. One thing I did for, I usually use a 11-foot tarp, but I do have a 12-foot tarp. So I cut another piece of this that's only about this long. Just you can make it a foot, 2 foot, whatever you need out of it. And I could put that in between these three and extend this out, and then I can get a 12-foot tarp on here. You know, a tarp with a 12-foot ridgeline on here. So that's something to consider when you're buying the poles, is how big your what's the length of your ridgeline of your tarp before you buy the poles, because you might need to buy a third one to add that extra length. And then the eye bolts, I forgot to mention these eye bolts. I put these Put these 2 inches in from the pole is where I drilled the hole to put the eye bolts. I forgot to mention that earlier. So now before I get the hammock out here and show you how to hook up a hammock to this, I just wanted to point out a few things. These boards are, I used treated wood. You don't have to, but it handles the elements better, especially while it's the parts that's on the ground. And always check, make sure where your bolt holes are at, where the bolt's going through the wood, that's not splitting or anything, because it could potentially split and then the whole thing just fall apart, or at least that one leg of it fall apart. So always check it, like any of your equipment. Check it when you get done using it, and check it again before you take it back out and use it again. It's just always a good idea with any equipment that you have. And another thing, some people, instead of using the stake, and like I said, it doesn't have to be this kind, but instead of using any kind of stake, they put spikes. They hammer spikes like a steel rod into the bottom of each leg, and then kind of grind it down and sharpen it at a point, so whenever they put it in the ground, it's not going to move around. I don't really recommend that, because for several reasons. First of all, if you're not staked down, the wind, even with those spikes in the ground, there's a pretty good chance once that wind catches that hammock, it's still going to blow it over. And also, if you ever wanted to use it in concrete, like me now, some of the hammocks I build, they have to be hung up while I'm measuring and fitting different things. And a lot of times I'll come out here in the garage and use these turtle dog stands to do this. My wife and I have slept in these turtle dog stands out here in the garage. If I had, because the weather was really nasty, we didn't feel like getting our tarps wet and everything, and we just, but we wanted to spend a night in the hammocks just because they're better than our bed, or because we just testing out something. So if I had metal spikes on there, I couldn't really do it on the concrete floor very easily. So that's something I've seen, if people put the spikes in there. I don't really recommend it. Okay, there are a couple ways that you can set up straps to this, and One way is you could just take the eye of the strap, stick it over the end of the pole like that, and like I said, this bolt needs to be cut off. But you could do it like that, or you could just take it like you would normally do and run the strap through the eye and tighten it down and do it like that. Either way will work on this, and hopefully you can see that. It looks like the camera's down low there. So you could run the strap through the eye and just put it over there, or you could just take the eye of the strap and run it through and hang it just from the eye. I prefer to do it like this, running the strap through the eye and then putting it over here and tighten it down, because it doesn't put as much stress on the stitching as it does if you're just hanging directly from the eye of the strap. And this up here, I don't like this, where this eye bolt and it goes through the pole and the washer and everything. So I always put like if I'm here in a garage, I'll take a rag or something, a clean rag or a towel or something, and put there to protect my straps. One thing you could do is, if you got a grinder or a file, you know, make sure you get all the smooth edges and stuff. I usually use a set of Dyneema straps for this. And that's the only thing I use it for. And sometimes they'll get pulled in underneath that washer there. But if you can, just get a set of straps specifically for this. So if you do any damage, you still got your good straps for your trees. But or use a pad, you know, use a towel, use a rag, use something there to protect your straps, and that way you get more life out of your straps, and it doesn't end up tearing through and then you're falling on the ground. I don't foresee that happening in one night, but, and like I said, if you check all your equipment before and after you use it, you'll notice if they're starting to get some tear and wear on your straps, and you replace them before you crash to the ground, not after. Okay, now I said in the beginning that these poles are 7 foot long. That's the measurement I was given whenever I first started doing it. 2 downsides to a 7 foot. First of all, it's not going to fit in the truck bed of most trucks. Maybe if you can get them in there sideways at an angle or something, you know. But some of those small bed trucks, they won't even fit in there at an angle. So the other problem with the 7 foot that I've experienced, not everybody, but I've experienced, by the time I get this get the tension on this right, so that when I get in it, oh, and do me a favor, don't tell my wife I'm using her hammock. She can be pretty mean. So by the time I get it, like right now, the tension in this ridge line is really loose, and the height of this hammock, like I'm sitting in here and I don't know, my feet, they won't even touch the ground. So by the time I get this high enough so that the tension on the cord, on the ridgeline is correct, it's hard to get in and out of the hammock. So I would really suggest going with a 6 foot pole, and that way you can still get it up so the tension's right, but you're down closer to the ground. And actually what I would suggest is, if you're going to make it, start out with a 7 foot, and then if you run into the same problem, then maybe cut it down to 6.5 or 6 foot. You can kind of determine, once you set it up right the first time, get your hammock set up and everything, you can kind of determine how much you need to cut off the poles. And when you put those eye bolts in there for the cords, you know, at least go 18 inches off the ground, so if you cut a foot off, you can still leave them in place and they'll be about 6 inches off the ground. But so that's it. That's a turtle dog stand. You can still put a tarp on there and you know, set it up like you normally would. We've camped in these out at a state park before, had tarps up and everything, and it was winter time and we had the tarps closed down pretty good. It all still works. But with the 12-foot tarp though, if you got a 12-foot ridge line, make sure you add that section in here to make this longer. And even with that, the way these poles kind of curve down, when you got the length of your tarp coming down here, it's still gonna, the tarp's still gonna work, but that's one more thing you got to kind of maneuver around, is that pole when you're getting in and out of your tarp if it's closed down. If your tarp's wide open in porch mode or something like that, or it's pretty far spread apart, shouldn't be an issue. But so that's it. I would suggest start out with a post 7 foot. Most of these boards you buy, they're in 8-foot lengths anyway, so start out with 7, and then go from there if you need to cut some more of it off. And check all your equipment, especially check your straps when you're using these. Find some way, if you could think of, to permanently pad that where the straps go, and check your poles and everything every time you use them. Make sure there's no cracks or anything where the bolts are going through there for the hinges. And other than that, it's pretty easy. Doesn't take any time to build these, you know, just cut the post to length, drill a few holes, bolt the hinges on, cut the post to the right length, and you're good to go. I mean, it's pretty simple, easy build. So hopefully that helps you out. For anybody interested in building a turtle dog stand, and if you have a turtle dog stand already and you're doing like a lot of people with the string run through the holes of the pole, maybe consider switching it to this way, because this works a whole lot better for storage, for transportation, for setup, everything about having these carabiners clipped to these eye bolts. Everything about that works better. So if you already have a turtle dog stand, I'd definitely consider making that switch. And thanks. Hope this helped out somebody. So I had everything, a little outline written out so I wouldn't forget anything, and of course I forgot my outline. I left it in the house, and I just remembered a few things. I think I was talking about eye bolts for those carabiners and everything. They're actually just the little, they look like an eye bolt, but they're on the end of it, it looks more like a screw. So you could just drill a little hole into the wood as a pilot hole and screw those in there. They're not holding much weight or anything, you know, they're just there to keep the legs from spreading apart. Another thing I forgot is the bolts that hold these two front outside legs. Since they have to be able to pivot, you don't want to take the nut and bolt and crank it down really tight, because you need them to move in and out. So one thing you might consider is using the Teflon nuts. That way you can screw it down fairly tight and not have to worry about it backing off on you. The last thing you want to do is get to where you're going and find out one of the nuts came off and you lost it. So that's something to consider, using a Teflon nut on all those. Or matter of fact, you just use a Teflon nut on everything, and then that way you don't have to worry about losing it. And the weight limits on this turtle dog stand, I can't tell you. I weigh 140 pounds, and it's held up to me. And my wife's about the same size as I am, and she's not having any problem with it. And my suggestion, if you're concerned about the weight, is if you're on Facebook, go on to the Hammock Forums Facebook page and just ask the question on there. There's a lot of people on there that have used this exact style of turtle dog stand and other variations of it, and those people were a variety of weight. So you know, if you weigh 250 pounds and somebody says, yeah, I weigh 300 and I've never had any issue, then, you know, it might work for you. But I cannot sit here and say, because I haven't load tested this or anything like that, so I can't say it's good for these amount of weights. So that would be my suggestion if weight is an issue, to get it onto Hammock Forums Facebook page. And if you're new to hammocks anyway, or wanting to get into them, if you get on the Hammock Forums website, Facebook page, there are a lot of information about everything you could think about. So I would go on that Facebook page anyway.